So today, very excited to be here. Kit 172A, that's our blind tasting kit. And we're tasting today with Paul Wagner, who is a professor of wine at Napa College, an author. You've written not only wine books, you've also now written mysteries, which I love to hear more about, Paul. And of
Yep.
course, we have Tim Gaiser, but let's start with Paul. Paul, where are you coming in from?
I am from my home in the Napa Valley. I am 2 blocks from City Hall in downtown Napa. So yeah,
Wonderful.
and today's a big day because it's the first day release of my first murder mystery on Audible. So now there's an
Nice.
audio book version of one of the mysteries.
Oh, wonderful. That's awesome. Okay. I'll tell you guys more about how I got to putting this together with Paul and with Tim. And Audible is a very, very big part of that. And then Tim, of course, thank you, Tim, for being here. Tim, where are you
Sure.
coming in from?
Coming in from the teeming megapolis of Rio Rancho, New Mexico, which is adjacent to Albuquerque. Lovely day here. We'd have warm weather at the beginning of November. So it's sunny. It's about 70 degrees. And it has yet to freeze yet, which is unusual. So excited. We've got a great flight of wines today. And also
Yeah,
really
yeah.
excited to work with good friend Paul Wagner. And Paul, we have a sordid past, a history going.
We do. We do. Yep.
Plus, you're both musicians. I love that. Is that the mandolin behind you?
It's actually a lute.
A lute. Okay. Well, shows
Actually a
what I
lute.
know about these string instruments.
Yep.
Well, Paul, so excited to be here. I just want to give folks a little background. I was on my way to Traverse City and was looking for things to listen to on Audible on my United flight. And I was going to sleep on this plane. I ended up not sleeping, which is very, very bad for me, because I turned on Paul's A History of Wine in 10 Glasses and I couldn't stop listening to it. It was so good. Paul, I laughed out loud. People next to me must have thought I was crazy and just did not sleep during my red eye. So enjoyed it immensely and went to Tim and said, I know you know Paul, introduce us. Let's get a kit going. So here we are. A few months later, we've got a kit. So I hope you guys really enjoy this. Um, it's a new format, so I want to talk through this for
Yeah.
folks. And it's going to be super confusing, but it doesn't have to be. So I got a message from a customer that I wish I was better about realizing this earlier. Which bottles should I chill? Because usually we have the first three bottles as whites and the next three bottles as reds or a rosé somewhere in there, and it's kind of easy to figure out what to chill. If you have chilled all six bottles, do not go, oh my gosh, my tasting is shot. Not a problem. If you chilled all six, just put your hands to the red wines when we get there. If it's still a little cold, if it's still in the fridge, take it all out, even the whites, and make sure that you have it sitting in front of you. You should probably pour them all out into six glasses if you have it. The second point is that we are not going to taste in the order where the wines are bottled. So you have 1 through 6, but we're going to taste 1, 6, 3, 2, 4, 5. So I'm going to keep reminding you guys which wine we're on. I know it sounds confusing. The reason is because we want the kids to be sort of self-sufficient. If you were listening to the stories that Paul has arranged in chapters, the 1 through 6 corresponds to the chapters that these wines appear in the book. But here you are. You've got Master Sommelier Tim Gaiser here, and you've got Paul Wagner, who knows his stuff around tasting progression. And we went, we can't taste from wine 1 through 6. We're all tasting all six wines at the same time. It doesn't make for a very good experience. So you'll see that we've moved the order around. And so wine number 1, if you've poured it out, is a white wine glass, and wine number 6 is a white wine glass, which is why we're going to go from 1 through 6. So I'll remind you when we get there. The last thing I'm going to say before I turn it over to Paul and you'll stop hearing from me, but from Paul, is we're going to guess by story. We're not just going to guess by aromas and taste. You should certainly, if you're doing blind tasting, figure out what your aromas and tastes are for the varieties, but we're going to give you 2 clues at least per wine. The first clue is going to be an artifact, a picture, a historical thing that Paul is going to talk about. And then we're going to have a picture of the vineyard that this wine is from, or similar vineyard that the wine would be from. And the vineyard serves two purposes. If you're studying, you know that a picture says 1,000 things to you. What kind of soil are you looking at? What kind of trellising are you looking at? What kind of terroir? What's near it? And Tim can help us put that connection together, what you're seeing in the picture and what you're tasting. Tim, this goes back to the why of the wine, if you will. So, you guys ready to start?
Yep.
All right. Clue number one.
Here's wine number one, and I'm going to start. I teach a class on the history of wine and society from prehistory through James Bond, more or less. I call it from Babylonia to James Bond. And this is one of the first areas we talk about, because this is where wine comes to Europe. And there's a wonderful section, I'm going to paraphrase it, from Euripides' play, The Bacchae, in which he describes Dionysus, the god of wine. And when Dionysus enters into the play, he says, "I am Dionysus, I'm the son of the king of gods. And I have come across the plains of Bactria and Persia. I have crossed the land of the golden rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. I have come to the turreted coast of Turkey, where Greeks and Turks have fought together for generations, even centuries. And now I have set them all dancing. I have come to Thebes to be recognized for what I am. I am a god." I'm sorry, but I can't think of a movie that has a better entrance for a main character than when Dionysus takes the stage. Dionysus, the god of wine, is also the god of rebirth. And if you'll notice that illustration there on the kylix, that's a drinking cup from ancient Greece, you will notice that Dionysus is rather comfortably seated on an ancient Greek sailing ship. But you'll notice something odd about the mast on that ship. There's a long story that goes along with this kylix, because Dionysus basically comes on board the ship incognito. He comes in as just another guy. And as sailors do, as they're sitting around on board ship sailing across the sea, Dionysus lets it be known that, hey, by the way, guys, I am Dionysus, the god of wine. And the sailors respond just exactly the way sailors respond. They say, "We don't believe you, not for a split second." So there's a bit of an argument. Dionysus gets his back up a little bit, and he says, "I can prove I'm the god of wine, but if I do, you're going to be sorry." And of course, the sailors aren't buying this. They're in for the whole bang. So they say, "Yeah, go ahead and prove it." So Dionysus reaches up and puts his hand on the mast of the ship. And of course, you can see what happened. The mast of the ship turned into a grapevine, came back to life, sprouted grapevines everywhere. And then to punish the sailors, he turned them all into dolphins. Now, what's wonderful about this scene is it's on the bottom of a drinking vessel. Remember that to be drunk in Greece was considered to be a huge social mistake. And so here you are, as you're drinking your wine out of the vessel, and they would have mixed this at least 1 part water wine, maybe 2 parts water to 1 part wine. As you expose the bottom of the cup, it's reminding you, don't overdo it, because Dionysus at the bottom of the cup is going to remind you, if you overdo it, you'll make a fool of yourself. So wonderful image there. And again, Dionysus, god of rebirth, also the god of theater. And you know those 2 famous masks of Greek theater, the tragedy and the comedy. It's because, of course, wine can make you very happy and it can make you very sad. And we've all had that experience at one point or another, either ourselves or with a friend, who either got hysterically happy or hysterically sad after too much wine. So all of this related to how do we keep the image of Dionysus as we go forward. The last thing about Dionysus is that he was the god of ecstasy. And if you remember, the root word of static and stasis means to stay the same. Ecstasy means out of the normal, out of the same. And so Dionysus was the god who took us out of our normal everyday lives and took us into a heightened awareness, a different state of mind other than our static. So all of that wrapped up in this idea that Dionysus was the god of wine. I thought that was a great way to start the tasting, because now we get to go back to ancient Greece. Remember, the book is a little misleading because, as Li Meng mentioned, it's a history of wine in 10 glasses, but there are actually 11 lectures. So it's just in case somebody is actually keeping track. This is 6 of the 11. And there you can see an idea of what we might be drinking, because this is a vineyard shot from where this wine was harvested. And it is interesting that the Romans admired the Greeks enormously. And in fact, not only did they copy Greek sculpture, Greek architecture, they copied a lot of stuff from the Greeks. In fact, if you were a Roman, if you were an upper class Roman, it was considered very stylish at the time of Julius Caesar, at the time of Nero, to speak Latin with a Greek accent, because that showed you were really cool. You were more Greek than you were Roman, so that you had to speak your Latin with a Greek accent. And the greatest wine in ancient Rome was Falernium, which was grown right outside Rome. But in the ancient world, there was one island that had the fame as making the greatest wines in the Mediterranean. And that island is pictured below.
Excellent.
Interesting. What's that?
Excellent. Thank you for that start. Not that we all need the warning. I hope you're in your homes or offices and enjoying this wine and not going anywhere. So, you don't have to worry too much about Dionysus turning you into dolphins. Tim, what do you think you want to tell folks to think about as they're tasting this wine?
Well, I think, this is a combination of kind of ripish and tart type fruit. Beyond that, there's not too many non-fruit type things. There's floral, there's a little verbena, very mild botanical type things. The wine is very mineral driven. It's got high acid, it's got some phenolics, and it's not very ripe. The alcohol is not very high. So this is a wine made from grapes that were, picked relatively early in the season. Especially, I'm looking at this vineyard knowing that it probably gets pretty hot there. And normally I taste this wine and would have been much riper. In terms of fruit, it's orchard fruit like ripe apples and pears, and it's tart stone fruit like white peaches, and again, it's sour. It's citrus type fruit. And then on the palate, I think what you see is the alcohol is not that high, maybe 13.5%. The acid's high, and there is some phenolic bitterness. So whatever this is, it's a thick-skinned grape. So that's what I think.
I just want to tell folks, and reminder, like always, the polls are anonymous. By guessing, by throwing in your answers, it helps us figure out which direction to go to explain some things or not. And just because there are some obvious grapes, if you don't feel like this wine is tasting by what the story is telling you, you can definitely put it in the chat. Also pick a different region if you'd like. But it's a little different. So I hope for those of you who've been with us a while will appreciate the fact that we're trying something new. Hopefully it works out. Here's a question from Jerry. Is it off dry to you, Tim?
No, Jerry, that's going to be our friend Jerry Collins. No, because the finish of the wine, which is really the true measure of dryness or sweetness, is absolutely dry. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. But I don't know. Paul, I thought your story was very engaging and pretty obvious, but we're at 71% participated. Again, it's anonymous. I want to see better participation on the next one, but don't be afraid. No one can see your answers. So we have 94% on Assyrtiko and 6% on Pinot Blanc. And we have 97% on Greece and 3% on California. So,
Okay.
There you go.
Good. Good. Yeah. Well, shall we do the grand reveal?
yeah, let's do the grand reveal.
This is, in fact, an Assyrtiko. It is from Santorini. And it is, and I thought Tim did a really good job of describing it. And what I would encourage you to do is think about this wine in terms of the kind of fish straight out of the sea that gets slapped on a grill and then slapped on your plate. No, they don't still break the plates after you eat dinner in Greece. Please don't do that. It causes a real scene. But this is exactly the kind of wine, if you're very lucky and you're having lunch in a cafe in Santorini overlooking the sea and you get a piece of fish, you're very lucky if this is the wine you're drinking alongside of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I visited this winery a long time ago in 2006. There was this infamous tour with MSs in Greece, and we went there to Santorini. And I remember seeing those vines and just thinking it was remarkable they could grow anything because it's basically volcanic rock. But
Yes.
Assyrtiko to me is one of the great Mediterranean wines, white or red. It's a personal favorite. And Naia is a great producer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was there a month ago. I was there a month ago, and they'd actually, a number of people had left the island in the previous 6 weeks because they had a series of earthquakes there. And if you know anything about Santorini, you know that at one point, a couple thousand years ago, this island blew itself to smithereens. Volcanic, just absolutely exploded. And people were pretty nervous at that point. The earthquakes settled down, and it was packed with people, and people were having a wonderful time drinking wine, eating fish, and wandering around thinking there are worse places to be than Santorini on a warm day.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to point out two things on this slide. Number one, this wine is $50 a bottle for the 750. And I said to Paul, we absolutely need to have the Santorini. And there are lots of Assyrtikos in Greece that are much cheaper than this, but not from Santorini. So in order to get a Santorini, and you even have, if you guys know about PGIs, you can have Aegean Islands, which is a higher level of classification, but specifically Santorini. Paul, can you talk a little bit more about why it's so expensive? When I talked to our distributor reps, some of them said they've skipped 2 vintages and the yields were crazy.
Yeah, they have a tough time, and Tim pointed out, this wine has pretty high acidity for something grown in Santorini. Growing wine in the middle of the ocean is a crapshoot. Because the weather is just never going to be, the old joke is, how does this year compare with a normal year? And the answer is, you tell me what a normal year is, and I can answer your question. Because they get high heat, they get rain, they get fog, they get everything all the time. And so just when you think everything's going great, something goes wrong. They've had very small vintages, and the wines are very popular, and you've got a ton of people going to Santorini. It's famous in a way that many of the other, there's wine made on Kos. That's not famous. Santorini is famous. So all of those exclusivity, rarity, low production, all of that combines to, and of course, really high quality.
Yeah. And for those of you who are new to Master the World, the alcohol is also on the bottle. So if you remove the little stickers that hide the identities, this is actually 13, not 13.5. So it's 13% alcohol. Paul, there's a question before we move on. Were the Romans and Greeks drinking Assyrtiko, or was it a different grape?
Yeah, nobody actually knows. We have records of grapes, but we don't actually know which ones still continue. There are some theories. Certainly some of the oldest grapes may go back 2,000 years. But the thing to remember about grapes in general is that they're genetically unstable. So I don't know if you saw recently that in Champagne, they just announced that Champagne the grape Chardonnay rosé, in other words, a pink version of Chardonnay, is now a permitted variety in Champagne. And those are simply grapes that have mutated over the years to produce pink fruit from what would normally be a Chardonnay grapevine. So when you start going back 2,000 years and saying, is this the same grape? Very, very difficult to make any conclusions along those lines.
Great. Excellent. I want to point out, if you are interested, we do have the MTW tasting note online. So you can go back online and download the tasting note. We have it in this way if you didn't want to go through the entire exercise of working it through yourself. And we do, of course, have the SAT version. When I showed this to Paul, Paul was like, we're going to go through all of this on air. No, we're not. But this is on the folder that you'll get so that you can have the tasting note as well if you are tasting. One last parting shot. Tim, is it salinity that I'm getting in the Santorini wine?
Yeah, it's, it almost smells like Visine too. Yeah, it's very saline. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Okay, now wine number 6 is what we're tasting.
Wine number 6.
It's
exactly.
a white wine.
Wine number 6, and I'm not only throwing you a curveball by serving wine number 6 in second place, but I'm also throwing you a curveball by using this image to symbolize what we're going to talk about, because this wine symbolizes the Roman rule of the world of wine. Rome, in many ways, made wine an international beverage in the Mediterranean. And the way they did this was that part of the salary, and again, for those of you who don't know, salary is a Latin word that comes from the daily issue of salt to their soldiers. They each received a small portion of salt, and that's where we get salary. They also got 1.5 liters of wine. And the challenge for the Roman Empire was that they did not want to be shipping wine to their troops all over the Western world. And so they planted vineyards everywhere. And this wine is an example of a region that they planted with grapes initially to provide the Roman centurions, the Roman soldiers, with their daily ration of 1.5 liters of wine. So if you look at that, it is the famous Black Gate, and I won't tell you where it is. I suspect Tim already knows, but it's the famous Black Gate. That is a Roman defensive gate that protected the borders of the Roman Empire against what I call the teenagers, the Goths, the Vandals, and the Huns. And those Goths, Vandals, and Huns lived outside the empire, and the Romans protected it with this series of forts, this series of gates, and stationing troops. And in every case, they planted their vineyards on hillsides above rivers. And there were really 4 reasons they did this. And I think, Li Meng, the next slide is in fact a photo of exactly what I'm talking about, because this is where the Romans planted their grapevines. Now, they planted them along rivers, partly because the rivers were the borders with the rest of the world. They planted them on hillsides because one of the great advantages that hillsides have is that the cold air will sink to the bottom and leave those upper stretches of the hillsides less damaged by frost. So you have cold air sinking down into the bottomland. The bottomland was used when it was available for wheat and other crops. The hillsides were for grapes. And then, of course, they were on rivers because rivers were the transportation system of the Roman Empire. So you could travel in 1 day on a ship what it would take you 7 days on a horse or 23 days on foot to cover. So as they're shipping things around the empire, the rivers were the superhighway. So yes, we're in a region settled by the Romans. The Romans, again, mixed their wine with water. And in fact, the Romans would say that anyone who drank their wine the way you are all drinking wine today, you're barbarians. Because you are drinking your wine without mixing it at least 50% with water. We can talk a little more about Romans, but that gives you an idea of what we're talking about here. Fabulous wine, by the way. Absolutely delicious. So, Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about what it tastes like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, thanks, Paul. This wine is yellow in color. It, the legs tiers, whatever you want to call it, are fairly high. And the thing, it's a veritable cornucopia of all kinds of fruit. So there's white peach, there's mango, there's pineapple, there's lime, there's green apple. What else about it? There's some very pretty honey and floral qualities to it. There's a stony, rocky quality to it. No oak whatsoever. The alcohol is missing in action. Yeah. The acid is high, which makes me think that the wine is more acidic and it's sweeter than you think, and that's getting to the residual sugar. So this is beyond slightly sweet. What else about it? The finish is long. This is Thanksgiving wine. That's all I can tell.
Yep.
And so here are your choices: Riesling, Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc. You've got Germany. You've got France, which actually works for all three of those. California, all three of those. Australia. But I think your clues are residual sugar and a lack of alcohol. And one thing I didn't notice is that there is that chemical compound TDN that smells like, I don't know, sulfur or fusel or gas or something like that. Okay. But I agree. This is delicious wine. Yeah. So vote early, vote often. This is your chance.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Romans actually are the ones who really created the concept of terroir, because the Romans owned villas all over the Mediterranean world. And those villas supported the senators who lived in Rome. So example, the poet Ausonius owned a villa in Bordeaux, and he had that wine shipped to Rome. That villa is now Chateau Ausone, named for the poet Ausonius. And that wine was shipped to Rome. And so he would not serve the wine as his wine so much as he would serve it from his piece of property in Bordeaux. And each one of these villas then owned its own, let's say, namesake brand of products. They shipped wheat, they shipped all sorts of different things from these various properties around Europe. And that really created this sense of Roman law, which is what gives us the European system of law, that a region owns the products it produces. And if you violate that law in Europe, you are not sued by someone else. You are actually prosecuted by the government for doing something illegal. Compare that to English law that says if you produce a drink called Coca-Cola, it's not the government who goes after you, it's Coca-Cola, it's trademark infringement. But in Rome, in fact, it was the region that owned, whether it's prosciutto di Parma or whether it's wine from the Veneto. In every case, that region owns that property, that description, and it's a criminal offense to violate those laws. And it's one of the reasons why when you start seeing US and European wine laws come into conflict with each other, that's one of the reasons you see it. The Romans actually had a very clear system on how to make wine. It was a book written by Columella. It was called De Res Rustica, which means of things rustic. And it was a complete owner's manual on how to run your own villa as a Roman senator or an important Roman. It included everything from how many slaves you needed to how much of the property should be dedicated to the great three: wheat, olives, and wine. Those were the three great properties or three great crops that the Romans produced.
That's amazing. Tim, just on a wine note, and then I'm going to give the 10 seconds before this poll closes. We still only have 73% participating. It's an anonymous poll, guys. So please fill in the blanks here. Tim, so you said you got the petrol on the nose, and then I also did feel like there's this bitterness on the end. Did you get any bitterness at all, or?
Not so much for me. What I did get is acid that actually dried the wine out, because I can feel the acid on my front teeth. The acid is high. Yeah.
Yep.
And the alcohol, if you inhale, it's like missing in action. So it's low. Yeah.
And on the bottle, we have it listed as 9% on alcohol.
Yep.
So you guys get a sense of that. All right, I'm going to close the poll up. Today's a soft day for folks filling in the polls. We're still in the 70s. All right, I'm going to share the results. Is it hard, guys? Is it harder with stories, or is it easier? I don't know. Okay, so here we are. 89% on Riesling, 3% on Chardonnay, and 8% on Pinot Blanc. Tim, I think you need to help explain what is Pinot Blanc, because we had people pick it both times now.
Yeah. Okay. So Pinot Blanc, I mean, technically, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a Burgundy grape. Yeah. So it's a Pinot grape. So it originated in Burgundy. To me, it's the Toyota Camry of Burgundy grapes, meaning that it's not a lot of personality. In fact, I think the wines with the most personality are in Alto Adige, the Pinot Biancos. But it's very Chardonnay-like in terms of its richness, but it's really, there's not a lot of non-fruit type stuff there. And it doesn't have the acid that Chardonnay has either. Whereas Riesling, of course, this has 9% alcohol and residual sugar and high acid. So that puts it in Germany, traditional German fruity style Riesling. Riesling in Alsace in France has higher alcohol by far, and it's just riper.
Yeah.
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 So yeah.
I would add one more thing about Pinot Blanc, which is all of the Pinot grapes, Gris, Blanc, Noir, and Chardonnay, all of them in one way or another have a textural element that I think makes them stand out from grapes like Riesling. They are luscious, they are viscous, they have this softness, this velvety texture that doesn't show up in a lot of other grapes. So if you're ever wondering, is this Pinot Blanc? One question to ask yourself, what's the texture of this wine like? We spend an awful lot of time talking about aromatics. Texture really plays a huge role in this.
All right, here we are. We are in the Middle Mosel, near the village of Trittenheim, I think. And this is Bullich Leonard. It's a family-owned producer. That was a great shot of Trittenheim Vineyards, by the way, the first one that you showed. And this is a Spätlese. I have to say that, climate change, this wine pre-2000 would have been Auslese for sure. I mean, this is just so rich and actually sweet. 2019, Germany, Mosel, textbook to me, Mosel type Riesling. And really a really good producer. There aren't as many in that part of the Middle Mosel as compared to Valen or Zonnener, et cetera, but this is, to me, is one of the best family-owned wineries there. Something unusual with this particular wine is seeing Alterreben, which means old vines. Alterreben is something you see in Austrian wines, but not so much in German wines.
I mean, this is a real value on the
it's magic. This wine is magic. And for those of you who don't know, that Black Gate was the Black Gate of Trier, which is one of the cities on the Rhine that the Romans fortified 2,000 years ago. And that was your clue to say it's connected to Rome, but we're in Germany.
Hey, tricky.
And we're in charge.
I think that's a little tricky, but I love it. So I thought that, Tim, this is a very small producer too, no?
Yes.
I like this picture. It's a little blurry, but it's obviously sloped and hand harvested, all the good stuff that you get. And once again, there is the full MTW tasting note. And for those of you who are asking the question, like, why is there an MTW tasting note? Because when we first started the company, Evan, Tim, Madeline, and I were arguing about all the different terms that one could use, and we wanted a more expanded term. And the world is thinking like WSET, but we wanted a little bit less handcuffs. So hence we have both things. And for those of you who are studying more with the Court of Master Sommeliers, you could feel a little bit more free to use whatever terms you want to use. All right, wine number 3 is indeed wine number 3 in this flight. So you can use number 3.
Well, and we're going to take that Roman story and bring it forward a few years, because the great book De Res Rustica by Columella was in fact the guidebook for how to make wine for 1,000 years. Now, if we go 1,000 years forward from Rome, we get in the middle of the Dark Ages, and there were really not that many people who could read and write. The one group of people who could read, write, were the monks. And so you have monasteries, you have churches, and there were two things going on here that are absolutely tied to wine. One of them is that monks and priests keep extremely careful records. They know when everyone was born. They know when everyone died. They know when everyone got married. They're keeping an eye on you in the church, and they're writing it down in books. So they're keeping very accurate records. The other thing to remember is that, yes, they could read. Yes, they could write. But they also had an additional function that came in during the Middle Ages, which is, it turns out that if you had done terrible things in your life, you could, in fact, make a gift to the church, and they would grant you what was called an indulgence. Now, one of the advantages of this is that you could give them, for example, a vineyard, and they would not only take ownership of the vineyard, but they would also, as part of the deal, give you a portion of the wine back. They would keep the rest of the wine, and you got eternal salvation. A really good deal if you can afford to pay for it. So the church ended up with a whole lot of vineyards. And in fact, speaking of Germany, Father Lorch, there is even a town on the Rhine called Lorch. Father Lorch was the recognized master vintner in the Middle Ages of the Rheingau. And this is another spot in the world where monks made wine. But one of the things they did as they made that wine is they kept those records. They followed the descriptions of De Res Rustica. They followed the directions. If you will allow me to make a bad joke, they followed those instructions religiously. And so as a result, they made every single wine exactly the same way. They grew the grapes exactly the same way. And then when they got those different wines into the cellar, they looked at each other and said, what do you know? The vineyard over there seems to taste a little different than the vineyard over on that side. And that ultimately, combined with this essence of Latin law, Roman law, really gave us the concept of terroir in spades. So this wine is a wine that speaks to terroir. It speaks to monks. It speaks to, they're not innovative. Monks are not innovating these things. Monks are doing things by the book, whether it's the Bible or whether it's De Res Rustica. But as a result, they're really identifying absolutely fine distinctions between one vineyard and the next. Wonderful. So that brings us to this wine. Tim, you want to talk a little about this one?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. What can we say? So everybody, even if you look at the glass, not a lot of color here. This is a wine made from a thinner skinned grape. You would expect it to be grown in a cooler place, probably. It's also red fruit dominant, so the fruit that you get is all sour and red, things like sour cherries and underripe strawberries and cranberries. It's also more savory, so there's more non-fruit type things. There's some pretty rose petal floral things going on. There's some herbal qualities and black tea qualities. It's also earthy, mushroomy, earthy. And then there is some oak here. For the first time, we've got a wine with oak, but it's mixed. It's not really dominant, so it's not a lot of spice character. And then on the palate, what you notice is that the wine, again, not a lot of alcohol. It's probably 13 and a half. It's got higher acid. It's got a little bit of green stemmy tannin, which means that it was made using whole clusters in the fermentation. And what else about it? The tannin is really moderate. You know, it's really, so yeah, all the clues kind of fit together. Mm-hmm. And let's see what everybody does with it.
I do have the color up here for those of you who don't have the wine. I want to make sure that you can see it, what Tim is talking about. You can see that pinkish rim and all that good stuff. So yeah, we've got some guesses already. Definitely put your guesses in there. I think this wine is lovely, Tim. This is a gorgeous wine.
It's a little bit of a shock after the Riesling and the residual sugar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Whereas this wine needs food. Yeah.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
give folks a little bit of time, Tim, can you talk about the technique to taste dry wines after tasting sweet wines? What do you usually do to kind of cleanse your palate?
I think we one or two things. One, you can just drink some water and rinse your mouth out really good. And two, just take, one or two sips, quick sips of the red wine that's dry or whatever wine, and then spit it out. And then your palate within, say, about 10 to 15 to 20 seconds, it acclimates. It resets. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you're drinking dessert wine, and then hopefully that's the last wine of the dinner or the tasting, because it's hard to reset dry wines after a dessert wine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
great.
that's the same technique. Even when we judge wine competitions, often they'll give you an initial wine because, of course, you're eating breakfast. Some of us are having coffee with sugar. A lot of us are having orange juice, and then you go in and taste the first wine of the day, and they give you a calibration wine. And the theory is it's to show you that wine. It's to convince you should be able to give a few medals in this competition. But the real purpose of that is to rinse your mouth out and just take a couple of sips, spit it out, and say, okay, we're going to start all over again. Forget what I just tasted. Forget those little sips. I'm going to go back, and now my mouth should be ready for this wine.
Yeah. Here's 10 seconds for those of you who need it. Let's finish it up. And I see people kind of going all over the board. So if you
Good.
picked Yeah, if you've picked other, help us out by telling us what other there is. Obviously, you wouldn't be anonymous when you put yourself out there in the chat, but there's no judgment here. If you did not think that it was Pinot Noir, Mencia, or Gamay, and you have other, please take a moment to tell us what you thought it was, and it'll be a great education moment for everybody. All
And
right.
Bill and Amy have written in and they say these days the church has dropped the salvation because the wine's too expensive. I don't think Bill and Amy watch enough daytime TV because you can make a donation and you will get salvation. I've seen it. I've seen it on television.
Wonderful. Okay, so here we go. We are 74% on Pinot, 3% on Mencia, and 21% on Gamay, and 3% on other. In terms of regions, we have 95% in France and 5% in Italy. What do you guys want to do? Should we show it and then we talk about what it's not?
Well, first of all, I think we should mention Philip the Bold and his suggestion that growing Gamay was a bastard grape that should never darken the hallway of any vineyard in Burgundy. So we need to note that those people who think this is Gamay are treading on dangerous ground when it comes to Philip the Bold.
You
Yeah, I
did.
would say also, if this was Gamay and the color was this light, you would have carbonic maceration. This would be Beaujolais Village, and you don't have any of that going on. None of the fruit punch, Jolly Rancher thing. This wine is I think pretty stemmy and pretty acidic and not tannic, but it's also bone dry. So and Menthea to me, yeah, same color, same texture, similar texture and weight, but it's more tannic than this, and it's also just earthier. But that's not a bad call.
Mhm. Mhm.
All right, let's see the magic, as they say.
All right. So let's go. Here we go. So we're leaving Germany, and are we going to France or Italy? I guess, Tim, there was a contingent for Italy.
Okay.
And so maybe help those guys out as to why it's not Italy.
Well, I would just say, red wines by and large in Italy are going to be more tannic than this. I mean, there are some really softer type wines like Frappato and maybe Dolcetto, but even they are weightier and they just have more tannin. So
Mhm. We didn't
here
go
we
very far.
are. We are in Burgundy.
Yeah, farther than you might think if you move culturally.
Right, right. That's
Physically,
true.
not that
That is
far.
true.
Culturally, a long distance.
Yeah. So small producer in Océ de Retz, which is in a little valley that's due west of Meursault in the Côte de Beaune. And this is Jean-Charles Fagot. They're Océ de Retz. And to me, again, one of the few places in Burgundy where the wines are still reasonably priced. Yeah. And I think textbook old school red Burgundy.
Mhm.
Yep. And actually, I'm going to go one more than that. Textbook, old school Burgundy, when it's good. Because Burgundy is always a little bit of a, oh my gosh, I hope we get something good with this. This is nice wine.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, remember what I just told you to you know, everybody, my daughter, Maria, got married in North Carolina last Sunday. And I took a couple of magnums of wine, and one of them was a 2009 Jean Griveaux Clos Vougeot Grand Cru. And I'd saved it for a special occasion. That was pretty special, but I opened it and the wine was really good. Really good. It did not. Grand Cru Burgundy, I think, especially for the money, should temporarily change your life, and it didn't approach that. So I'll just
Yeah.
say, everybody
Yeah,
enjoyed it, but then everybody on their phone put in the wine and then looked up the price and then got sticker shock. So yeah,
Well, and then told you how good it was.
that's right. Then they changed the wine and said, "Oh, this is the best wine ever." Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll go on to the next wine. And this is wine number 2. So we're going to that red wine glass, wine number 2, if you will.
Yep. And there are two parts to this story, because one of the absolute critical elements in the development of European history was, at the end of the Dark Ages, the Black Death. Now, yes, it killed, depending on your community, it killed anywhere between 30 and 70% of the people in the community. But remember that during the Middle Ages, it was a feudal society. There were the nobles who fought, the religious people who prayed, and 90% of the people were peasants and they farmed. And that was it. And whatever you were born to, that's what you did for the rest of your life. All worked pretty well for about 500 or 600 or 700 years. And then the Black Death came. And the Black Death did two things. One of the things it did was it killed enough people that even if you wanted to do what your father had done, chances were there were people around that needed jobs getting done. When all of the priests in the church died, they picked some altar boy and said, "You're the new priest because I know your dad's a farmer, but man, we need somebody." So it introduced this idea of social mobility in a way that hadn't happened before. Opened the doors for moving around in society. The other thing it did, remember all those indulgences? Remember how the church was telling you that if you lived a good life, you'd be eternally saved. And if you made donations, you could cut your time in purgatory and all of that stuff. And then the Black Death came, and it turned out that the priests and nuns and monks died just as fast as anybody else. So it turned out that maybe religion wasn't the end of all philosophical arguments, because it didn't seem to serve any purpose in the face of the Black Death. And what that encouraged people to do was look for other sources of philosophy and other ways of looking at the world. And what they discovered, often thanks to Arab scholars who had saved these works in Spain and in Africa, what they discovered was the philosophy of the ancient Greeks. And the philosophy of the ancient Greeks then came back to life. And that rebirth is where we get the term Renaissance. And that Renaissance was people in Italy, yes, but also other parts of Europe going back, not necessarily using the Bible to explain everything, studying people like Archimedes. We all know Archimedes because he invented that wonderful screw conveyor that works at every wine crush pad on the planet. And we know Aristotle, and they discovered these, and then they started recreating not the very static art of the Middle Ages, but they started creating the really expressive and emotional art of ancient Greece and then the Renaissance. And of course, the statue we use to signify that is Michelangelo's David. And you may wonder, why has David become a symbol for the city of Florence? It's not just because it was carved there and installed there. The real question is, why did they commission it? And the answer is kind of interesting, because Florence, although we think of it as a magical city, remember at the time in the Renaissance, Florence was not the most powerful city in not even in Italy, let alone Europe. Of course, Rome was more powerful. Milan was more powerful. Florence was kind of the little kid that, let's say, boxed above his weight. And who better to symbolize the little kid who could take down the giants than David? So Michelangelo actually sculpted David not only to show off that he knew how to carve a block of marble like nobody else, but also to show that Florence was a city that could compete with the very biggest and most powerful cities in the world, even though they didn't have that kind of muscle. And with that, we ought to talk about maybe a vineyard.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk. I thought we were going to talk about the other photo, because the other photo, talk about a photo being worth a zillion words.
Yes, that's Dante, and that's a picture of, actually, unfortunately, it's Dante's Paradise, because that's the 7 levels
it goes
of
up.
heaven.
Yeah,
And the more fun book is the one that goes down, and that's Dante's Inferno. But Dante pretty much ended the Middle Ages in Italy by writing a huge, massive work written in Italian for the first time, not in Latin, but he started the idea that you could write great literature in a common language rather than the classic language of the monks, and that opened up all sorts of doors. And he and Boccaccio, who wrote his famous Tales of the Decameron, were the two people who really made that happen. And by the way, Dante is not buried in Florence. He's buried in Verona because he made enough trouble in Florence that they put a death sentence on his head and exiled him. And he went to Verona. And by the time he'd made it big time and they invited him back, he said, "I'm not interested." And so if you really want to see the great statue of Dante, it's in the Piazza Dante in Verona, not in Florence.
So here's the vineyard, very different.
Rolling hills.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that photo was taken about this time of year too, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So where are we with rolling hills? I'm going to set out the poll. And of course, Tim, some notes on the wine?
Yeah, well, this is, it's, how can I say, this is a classic example of what this is. And predominantly red fruit, ripe and tart, even dried. There's some dark fruit. There's potpourri above the glass that is dried. To me, the structure of the wine, it's moderate in alcohol, has almost high acid, and then it's got quite a bit of tannin. It's got tannin in the front and tannin in the back. So that's both grape and oak tannin. It's very savory. It's quite earthy. And to me, it's got a real sour cherry pit finish, which to me is a signature of the grape and the wine.
Yep.
And I would just say that, Paul, you and I have a history with this place. We went there, and so lots of great memories about this particular place.
Yeah. And one thing I will say about all of these wines that I absolutely love is they are lively. These wines jump into your mouth and throw a few punches and say, "Yoo-hoo, look at me." None of this rich, soft, just coat your palate and slink down your throat. These wines are you're paying attention to these wines, which I just think is wonderful.
Yep. All right. So they're the choices. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Let me put the choices up. Do I get a little bit of like that nail varnish? Do you get it at all?
Yeah, there's a little balsamic vinegar, which is VA, volatile acidity. But context is everything. And I think here, for this particular wine, I don't expect to find it, but I'm not surprised when it's there. It also, it doesn't dominate the wine, and it's just part of the whole fabric of it.
Great.
Amanda says, how would I describe the texture? Amanda, it starts off kind of lush, but the acid and the tannins make it lean on the finish. So that's a good question.
So we have Merlot, Sangiovese, Cabernet Sauvignon, and in terms of region, we have France, Italy, and Australia, and California. So for those folks who are putting it in, thank you so much for getting our participation numbers up. I'll give you 10 more seconds, and then we'll close this poll out. And for hanging in there, guys, with jumping back and forth on different wines. I really appreciate that. So let's see. We have people picking on everything. And if there's anyone who wants to step in and say what other you were thinking of, please do let us know. And I'm going to end the poll right now. I haven't seen this in a while, Tim. 100% on Italy, but 3% on Merlot, 89% on Sangiovese, 5% on Cabernet Sauvignon. So, since the majority is on it, what do you think we should tell those folks who did not see Sangiovese?
I would just say, Cabernet would be more tannic. It would be darker fruit. Merlot would have darker fruit, just richer too, and softer tannins. This is kind of a medium weight wine with higher acid than you think and higher tannin than you think. And it's also very savory and finishes bone dry. So the grape tannin, oak tannin, to me, that duo always puts me in Italy. And then from there, it's paying attention to other things. And here we are. We're going to go to Tuscany.
Yep. And Tim, I would add, you and I, as you noted, we've done a lot of work in Tuscany over the years together. The color alone, we would taste these wines, and at one point, Tim and I and a friend of ours had the opportunity of tasting about 40 or 50 Chianti Classicos, all as a huge flight. And we could identify almost immediately any wine that had either Merlot or Cabernet or Syrah blended into them, because immediately, even with 3 or 5%, the color got darker.
Yeah. Yeah. So Paul's asking, can we compare this to Nebbiolo? Hey, Paul, it's related but similar. It's related but totally different. I mean, Nebbiolo would have lighter color, more acid, more tannin, and would be higher in alcohol because they have to pick it later. So, and it would also be more floral. But in terms of the texture, it would be this wine, lighter in color, dialed up to 11. Yeah.
But I want to put in a word for Paul, because I think that if you asked me what other grape this could be, Nebbiolo would be an option for me more than Cabernet, for example.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good call. And it's too bad, Paul, we don't have time to tell him about how you and I and our colleague had a meeting with the mayor of Montepulciano, because that was the greatest experiences of my
We have time for that. That sounds like a story.
No, it's a long story, but it's very memorable. Yeah.
I will say that before that meeting with the mayor, it was pouring rain in Tuscany. We went into Montepulciano to taste some wine in a cellar underneath the offices of the Consortio. And we came out about dusk, and we'd been drinking Sangiovese for a couple of hours, few hours. And when we came out, the clouds had blown away. It was that golden hour, and it just made you understand that if you drank 40 or 50 Sangiovese, the whole world looks better.
Yep.
I'm going to show the bottle per request. And I have to say, if you have all 6 wines in front of you, go back and nose these reds every once in a while. It is amazing to me how each one is so distinctive and different on the nose, and so much can be told from just the nose alone. So
and this wine happens to be 100% Sangiovese. I was looking on the website. I was convinced there was Colorino or another Italian grape, Tuscan grape, but it's 100% Sangiovese. So.
Okay, I'm going to skip through the tasting notes and get to the next historical clue. Totally excited about this facade.
And let's get rid of that poll if we can, so people can see the image there. Because we are now going into another part of the world. This is one of the most isolated wine regions in the world. There is one of the largest towns in this region is actually named for the scratching of wolves at the door. So that gives you an idea of exactly how civilized it was. The monks came in the 15 and 1600s in the same way they went all over the world, bringing the word of God and hoping to civilize the locals. And within 100 years, the monastery was in ruins. It's still in ruins today. The monks failed. The wolves are still scratching at the door. And this is a part of the world that not many people get to see. It is part of a larger story, which is before Ferdinand and Isabel got married in Spain, there were really basically two Spains. For quite a few years, there was the central part of Spain, which, and I'm going to give everything away here, but it's okay because we're in this for fun. Castilla, named for the castles, named for the reconquest against the Muslim invaders from the south who spent 800 years ruling Spain. And Castilla-La Mancha is full of castles. And when Isabel united with Ferdinand and unified Spain, her saying was, one king, one law, one faith. No room for DEI or diversity or woke nothing. This was one law, one king, one faith. And when you travel around Castilla-La Mancha, it's amazing how many wines are made with one grape, Tempranillo. And then you go to the other parts of Spain, around the edges. You go out to Galicia, you go over to Catalonia, down to Valencia, and suddenly you're seeing people using all these different grapes. They were never part of Castilla-La Mancha in the beginning. And so they've explored a lot of different areas, a lot of different philosophies about growing grapes. In Catalonia, you actually still see there are regions in Catalonia that have to put the grape variety on the label, because just like California, one producer can make wine from 6 or 8 different kinds of grapes. So think of Spain as that central part of Spain being iconoclastic, one God, one law, one faith. But as you get around the edges, you get some more interesting approaches. This wine comes from one of those edges. This was an area that was completely forgotten 40 years ago. A few people started to explore, and it's a great example of something that has happened all over Europe, which is wonderful grapes were being grown, and yet the technology to make wine simply wasn't there. And so the wines were made into cheap bulk wine, often shipped off to other countries to be bottled in bulk. And yet about 35 years ago, the European Union started making low interest, actually zero interest loans available. And some of these co-ops and some of the producers in these regions started putting in modern winemaking equipment. And it was as if someone took the blinders off the horse, and all of a sudden these wines just started to shine. And if you haven't explored the regional wines of Spain, whether it be Rías Baixas or Borba from Valencia or Garnacha or wherever you are, the wines they are making, the white wines of Rueda, are stunning wines. And that's happening all over Europe. Greece with that Assyrtiko is another example of that. They had the grapes, now they've got the technology. And if it's a wonderful time to be looking around the world for wine, because man, are good wines being made everywhere. And this, I think, is a really good example of a really good wine being made in a region that 30 years ago, nobody knew even existed.
Mm-hmm. And this picture, I think, says a million things about the region. It's just so gorgeous.
It is gorgeous. And you can see not many vineyards. The vineyards are very tough. And there is an expression in Spain, España vacía, which means the empty Spain. These are these small towns where 50 years ago, they were small farming communities. The next generation grew up, studied, went to university, went to Madrid, lived in Madrid, and there's nobody left to farm a lot of these grapes. It's a pretty interesting development in the world of wine.
We did give it away that it is Spain, but let's test your knowledge. Where in Spain could this be? So if you want to throw it in the chat and tell us what you're thinking, that'd be great. Tim, here's what Amanda said. Does this not look like northern New Mexico? What do you think, Tim?
Yeah,
Yes,
well,
exactly.
Amanda, just a shout out. Amanda's from Santa Fe. In fact, I saw Amanda in September at Wine and Chili. It was great to meet her in person. But Amanda, you're absolutely right. It looks like northern New Mexico up by Abiquiu, or it even looks like southern Colorado by Cortez. So yeah. But yeah, so the really rugged terrain. This to me, this wine is it's so good. It has really rich, lush fruit, but it is intense in terms of its density. It's got more tannin. It's got more earth. The alcohol is a little higher, probably. I think I forget what it is. It's 14, something like that. Just a rich, but it's got a lush fruit, but a real backbone to it, and it's very savory. So yeah.
Tim, 14 and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like you go to 15 and a half. Tim, what is this thing that I'm getting on the nose? I can't get over it. It's just amazing. The nose.
It's a combination of different things. To me, it's very savory. I know Madeline Triffon is listening in, our good friend Maddie, and it's a little of the Jimmy Dean thing, the savory, gamey type thing going on. But it's very earthy, and the fruit is really ripe, but it's got some acid that holds the wine together. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an interesting thing. I'm going to stop the poll. I like that it's between two grapes for folks. And I think that what you just talked about, the ripeness of the fruit, is probably leading people the other way. Okay, there is a question. Oh, yep. Thank you, Ron. Malaga. We've got Purat and Maddie. Hello, licorice. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to end the poll right now. I'm going to share the results.
I would say again, going back to something I love to harp on, the texture of this wine. If you want a difference between the first three red wines and this one, this texture is luscious. This texture comes onto your tongue like a velvet blanket and just says, I'm going to hang around here for a while, in a way that none of the previous wines did.
Yeah.
So 91% were on Grenache and 9% were on Zinfandel. Let's talk about why those 9% of folks who think it's Zinfandel. What clues could they have had, and what clues are they missing?
I just think that the fruit's really ripe. With Zinfandel, first of all, I mean, classic Zinfandel is California, and so the wines usually aren't earthy or very earthy at all. And also, there's Zinfandel doesn't ripen evenly, so it can have really raisinated fruit and really red, tart, or even green fruit. And this, to me, is all really ripe fruit. So yeah.
How would you compare this from Paul to a Southern Rhone?
Paul, you want that one, or do you want me to take that?
Well, either way, I mean, we can both talk about it. To me, Southern Rhone, one of the things you don't have in this wine is Brettanomyces, which is in a lot of Southern Rhones. And Southern Rhones, to me, they seem hotter. They seem more warm climate. They seem to have less acidity than this. You're right. In some ways, it is in many ways the same grape. But I would like to put in a brief note here that Grenache is a Spanish grape. It was brought to France from Spain. So we should really be calling it Garnacha. And the French people discovered it, and Monestrel and Carignana, which the French call Carignan, all of those started originally in northeastern Spain and then were brought back to France by travelers.
Yeah, I would echo those comments. I would just say, Southern Rhone Grenache blends, to me, they're riper. And they're more red fruit dominant. They're more savory. They have more gamey, Jimmy Dean type things to them. This to me is earthier, and it is more tannic. I think Deepankar was just asking. Yeah, this is more tannic. Usually it is. And we've got a short trip to make here. Paul's private jet. We're gonna be, we'll be there in less than 90 minutes. And we're in Priorat. I've never been here, Paul. Have you?
Oh, yeah. I've been there a couple of times. I actually teach in Tarragona, which isn't far away. So I've been there quite a few times. They are now beginning to build hotels. When I was there 10 years ago, I was put up in the best hotel in Priorat. It was a small country inn in the town of Gratallops, which means the wolf scratching. And it was run by an elderly couple who screamed and yelled at each other. When the phone would ring, the husband would yell at the wife get the phone, she would yell back she was busy, he should get off his ass to go answer the phone. It was not, let's just say it was not like visiting Tuscany or Burgundy or the Moselle.
That's
I
great.
just want to point out here again, this is a huge value wine. We had two wines that were really in the price point at $50.45, and then a couple of wines that just really over delivering, I think, for the price point that it is for a 750. Really was surprised by this wine. And it's brought in by Patrick Mata and Alberto from Vinos Atlantico. And I think Alberto's family's from Purot, if I'm not wrong. And anyhow, beautiful wine and really exciting. Yeah, Amanda's got the dried herbs too on the finish. Tim, you get that too? Yeah.
Yeah, the wine's quite savory. Yeah.
And I would, you mention on there the smaller region within Catalonia is Priorat and Montsant. And I'm just going to put in a brief testimonial. Montsant wines show many of the same characteristics of Priorat. They don't have the fame, but they are getting the same kind of treatment in a lot of cases. And Montsant wines can be an absolute screaming steal on the market if you can find them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're on wine number 6. And Paul, you don't know this, but to get to wine number 6 at 214 is quite a feat with all this extra historical references for Tim and I.
Yeah.
So we're very excited that we have this much time to talk about wine number 5 is the wine that we're on, which is the last wine of the flight.
Right, and I don't know how many of you know who that gentleman is on the left, but there's quite a famous story. He is one of the legendary characters in all of history, and it goes back to this story begins with the Crusades, because during the Crusades, the English Crusaders sailed for the Holy Land and stopped off in a small town, a small port town in Portugal called, ironically, Porto. And across the river from Porto was the town of Gaia. And Gaia was the town controlled at the time by the Muslims. And the Crusaders fought against the Muslims. The town burned to the ground, so it had to be rebuilt. And the Crusaders eventually drove the Muslims out of northern Portugal down south of Lisbon. And that began a wonderful relationship between between Portugal and the UK that continues to this day, mutual assistance in defense and other things. And so I lay that as a groundwork, but also remember when Gaia, the town of Gaia across the river from Porto burned to the ground, it was rebuilt. When it was rebuilt, it was called the Vila Nova de Gaia, which means the new town of Gaia. And of course, that's where port comes from. And the combination of those two cities, Porto Gaia, is ultimately what gives us Portugal, the name of the country. It was called Gaia because it was originally by the Romans called Gales, and Gales is Latin for Welsh. So these are Celtics, these are Gaelic people. We think of Iberia as being huge Arab influence, and we think of them as having Goths and Visigoths and Latins. We don't realize the whole northwestern part of Spain is actually Gaelic. There are places where they wear wooden shoes and places where they play the bagpipes. And of course, northwestern Spain is called Galicia, the land of the Gaels. So you've got all that going on in the history. And then in the early 1800s, Napoleon decided that he wanted to invade Portugal because he couldn't invade England directly. So he was going to invade their oldest and closest ally, Portugal. He asked permission from the King of Spain to march his army across Spain to attack Portugal. And the King of Spain was in no position to refuse, and so he didn't. And when the army got to Madrid, they said, oh, and since we're here, we might as well take over Spain as well. And they installed Napoleon's brother as the King of Spain. And then they marched to Portugal. And England had already lost almost an entire army in Iberia to Napoleon's troops. So they sent a small contingent with a young colonel by the name of Wellesley. And he actually lost his first battle, but he was a smart guy and he won the next battle and he won the next battle. And then they started sending more troops. And then he won the battle in Burgos. And then he won the battle in Salamanca and in Bordeaux. And he chased Napoleon across Europe until finally in 1815, he defeated Napoleon at Waterloo. And by that time, he was no longer Colonel Wellesley. By that time, he was the Duke of Wellington. And that's who you're looking at there on the left. And of course, if there's anything that brings joy to an English officer's heart, it's the fact that as he's off fighting against French people, he can make money in the wine business. And so, as we will see on the next slide, there were a whole bunch of people who got involved in the Portuguese wine trade. The gentleman on the right, this is a fascinating story because some of you may know the earliest existing definitive map of a wine producing region is the famous map of the Upper Douro, created by the port wine industry. And the man who created that map, to give you an idea, the Portuguese didn't trust anyone from Portugal. They hired an Englishman to make the map. His name was Barão de Forrester, and he did this at the time when Portugal had no king. They had only a prime minister by the name of Pombal, and Forrester did a brilliant job. He concluded there was only one place in the world that you could grow great port wine, and he delineated that map, and he made only one exception. A small estate just outside of Lisbon, which just happened to be owned by the Marquês de Pombal, the prime minister. So you could make port in all of the port region that he delineated and this one little property that Pombal owned. Now, why is he on the same slide as this lovely lady on the left? And that is because she inherited a winery. Her husband died young, and like so many of these stories, whether it's Veuve Clicquot or someone else, she was a wonderful, wonderful lady. She ran the winery herself. She was beloved by her workers, and in fact, when there were times of hardship, she often paid them even when she had no money. She managed to feed everybody. She became legendary. And she and the Barón de Forrester were on the same ship that was used to float these wines down the Douro to Villanova de Gaia, where they would be bottled. But in those days, those trips involved running the rapids. These days, it's all dammed and you can take a cruise ship on it. But in those days, you had to shoot the rapids. The boat overturned in the rapids. And Doña Antonia Ferreira floated to safety with her immense petticoats serving as a kind of life preserver to float her to safety. The Barón de Forrester on the right, the legend has it, had so much gold in his pockets from being paid for all the work he did that he sank straight to the bottom, just like Don Giovanni, straight into the gates of hell. But anyway, that's the story behind this wine. I can hardly wait to taste it. And that's the Douro.
The great finale. I mean, this picture is just amazing.
Yep.
I really love this chapter in your book, I have to say. So for those of you who finally get to the audiobook, just go put it on a drive. It is amazing. And you know, I've been in the business a long time and I found new stories. I played it on the bottling line for the Psalms here and they went, "Oh, I didn't know that." So, you know, it's really a fun book. It will remind you of things. But Tim, what do you think of this wine?
I think it's delicious. And you know, the producer, when we get to a second, so obviously the wine is fortified. Everybody, somebody way up on the comments said, "Oh my God, there's a lot of alcohol." Yeah, in this case, 20%. And it's just incredibly warms the nose and the throat. It's got fruitcake type like spices and fruit. So it's all compoted stew type fruit. There's figs, prunes, raisins, dates, macerated plums, and then it's all sorts of spices. There's a lot of wood influence, so it was in wood for a long time, which when you see what it is, you'll understand. And the color of it also belies what category of the kind of wine it is. So I think as fortified wines go, this is delicious. And this too is a Thanksgiving wine. I'm thinking of pumpkin and pecan pie and thinking
Oh
this
yeah.
would be perfect, if not with a cheese course. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Pecan pie in this wine is a match
yeah,
made in heaven. I would point out that a lot of those terraces you're seeing in the photographs are only 2 vine rows wide.
yeah.
And to give you an idea of how complicated it is to make wine in this region, they literally pick the 2 rows at different times because the row that is close to the hillside gets more radiated heat and it ripens about a week to 10 days earlier than the row on the outside. So not only do they pick these steep hillsides by hand, they pick them twice.
Mm. Yep,
That's
yep,
pretty
yep.
crazy. Paul, I know I talked to you on the phone about history that you don't seem to be holding on to any notes, and yet it just comes out like all these stories and this history. It's just from years of knowing this stuff, from teaching this stuff. How do you remember all this?
Well, certainly it's years of teaching this stuff, but my father was actually a history teacher, and he had a wonderful, wonderful line about teaching history. He said, "You only get one date because if you give students 2 dates or even 3 dates, they will inevitably confuse them. And then you won't get what you want. So you only get to give them one date per class." So in other words, the way to get people to remember things is not to rattle off long dates and histories, but rather stories. And those
Mm.
stories make this history come alive, and you begin to see the threads that tie it all together. And once you get those threads, then it's easy enough to follow, from the Crusades to the fight against the Moors in Spain, and then you get to tie it to the English and the Treaty of Methuen, and then you try it all together. And at any point, it's a little bit like opening up a book, and you can just sort of, oh yeah, this is that part again.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Tim, just for those who are new to port,
Yeah.
the difference between tawny and maybe what a ruby port would be. This is specifically a tawny.
Yeah, it's just the color has to do with how long the wine spent in oak, and you can see age declaration for this particular wine is 10 years. I've never discovered, maybe you know this, Paul. So I've heard it's the average number of years it spends in oak, or the longest that any of the fruit, or it's a concept of how long the wine spent in oak, which is the most popular answer. What do you think?
Yeah, it is. In fact, there is a tasting panel, as there are in many DOCs, DOCGs, etc. There is a tasting panel, and there is no specific documented age requirement. What you have to do is submit a wine to the tasting panel, and they have to agree that it tastes like a 10-year-old tawny. Now, there's a punchline in all of this that a dear friend of mine who told me the story that, just for fun, he took a tuber that had been aged for 10 years and submitted it to the panel, and it was rejected. It did a 10-year-old tawny.
I think you said that it was rejected even though he had aged it in 10 years. They cut out a little bit.
He had aged it 10 years in oak and submitted it to the panel, and they rejected it because they said it did not taste like a 10-year-old tawny.
There you go.
There you go.
It's kind of
So yeah,
arbitrary, is what you're saying.
there is a style they are hoping to achieve, and that's what that panel decides. And yeah, Tim is absolutely right. It's color and it's the time in oak. Ruby ports generally spend less than a year in oak, they're ruby. And tawny ports spend anywhere from a few years to up to 40 years in a they're tawny, they're brown rather than pink.
So, Paul, there was a question about your book. It's only an audiobook. It's only on Audible. You can get in from Amazon to go into the audiobook. It is not, from our website. You can click on it. It's not technically free, but if you don't have an Audible account, you can have a free trial of Audible, and I guarantee you'll finish Paul's book before 30 days are up. So, go ahead and get that free trial. And if you have Audible, It is free. So if you click on it, Marshall was probably free for you if you have an Audible account, and you are able, it's one of those Audible originals. So you'll be able to listen to it for free on Audible. I hope that
Yep,
makes sense.
exactly right. Exactly right. And boy, I agree. This wine is delicious.
Mm,
This wine just makes you want to, yeah, serve a piece of pecan pie, or dare I say it, fruit cake.
sure.
Great with this wine. And then the other thing is, people always want to talk to me about Cabernet and chocolate. I'm sorry, I'm not a fan. But Ruby Port with chocolate and
Yeah.
Tawny Port with milk chocolate, Ruby with dark chocolate. But this wine with milk, with a Ritter Sport milk chocolate and hazelnuts, pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Here's a
So
great
Jerry, leave it to
sorry.
Jerry to ask a technical question. So Jerry, yeah, inexpensive tawny ports are actually blends of white and regular port. Hence, they have the similar color. They're not as oxidative, but a true aged tawny port has the qualities of this wine. And I have a special place in my heart in Ferrera because of my birth year, which is one of those missing in action years, 54. There's practically nothing. There's great Madeira, but Ferrera, Paul, actually declared in 1954. So
Excellent.
I've been able over the years to pick up bottles of 54 Ferrera. Yeah.
Nice. Here's a question.
Well,
Vintage port and dark chocolate, does that work?
yeah, let me just explain that vintage port is a version of Ruby. It is the
Yeah.
high version of Ruby Port. So it doesn't spend very much time in oak, which is why it has that bright color. And yes, it works well with dark chocolate. And if you are interested in the upper end version of tawny port, there is a kind of port called colheita, which is in fact a tawny port made from a specific harvest spistage. And you can buy those going back to the 30s at least these days. Tim, you were born in 54. My wife and I were married in 77. Pretty crappy year everywhere in the world, except it's a
Except
great year
for port. It was
except
a
it's a
great vintage
great
for
year
port.
for port. So